All right.
All right. And as we would say, and people are going to be hearing from us, Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. I'm Harinam Singh Khalsa. I'm with Gurpyare Singh. And how you doing today? How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing pretty good, pretty good. I had a nice nap earlier and I ate a very big lunch. So I would say that this is a pretty good day. What about you, sir?
Well, you know what? You're in Argentina. I'm in Mexico. You're 4 hours ahead of me. So I haven't even had my morning cappuccino yet. So that's that. But it's already a good day for me because this is actually, for anybody watching this is actually our first contemporary episode of this video podcast or audio podcast, depending on how the audience is digesting it, of Warrior Saint.
Yep,
And
exactly.
so this is, I'll even say this, December the 16th, 2025. So this is a auspicious day for the two of us and our audio.
You know, I think I'm sorry to interrupt you there, sir, but I think that it would be interesting to know for our audience who is watching or listening, why is it that this podcast is called A Warrior Saint? Why that title exactly?
Well, first of all, let me give you a little history
Okay.
on that, because I think that'll give it some context, and then we could talk about it, because I think that's it. This is a very big topic itself for why this podcast is called Warrior Saint, and people may have assumptions of what that means, but let's set it straight for the record, right? Oh, actually, the history of this goes back to, I believe, 2012. So 13 years ago, I was living in New York City. And I was invited as a guest on a radio show, I think talking about yoga, meditation, life. I don't recall exactly, but those kind of things, philosophy.
Yeah.
And it was on some national network. And the woman, and I believe her name was Fanny Cohen. I never met her before, but she was kind of interested in some of the things I think I said in the interview, and she was kind of, I guess, in the pioneering movement of what we know now as podcasts, when that just was coming into being, and she must have been about 30 at the time, so she was a young person, I think, who had an interest and an affinity towards not only the technology, but kind of putting different kinds of material out in the public sphere that had just been on the major networks or whatever. So she was, I think, kind of pioneering in this. She invited me over to her studio, and she asked me if I was interested, that she would be interviewing me.
Right.
And she asked me what I wanted the name of the podcast to be. And I said, well, the first thing that came to my mind was Warrior Saint. And the reason I said Warrior Saint is that, I mean, as you can see from my appearance, I have a little bit different appearance. I'm not only a member of the Sikh religion, which you could see from my beard and my turban, but those in the know also can see from my appearance that I'm something known as an Amritdhari Sikh. So I'm very, very loyal to a particular clear view of that tradition. And the thing that is personally the center of my life is an ideal called the Khalsa, that was developed by a brilliant and saintly man called Guru Gobind Singh, who lived 300 years ago, who was the 10th in the lineage of the Sikh Gurus. And we'll talk about that, obviously, in more detail at another time. It's too interesting. But let's just say that I consider myself a disciple of this great saint who lived centuries ago. And I really came to feel that his worldview, his recipe for a person attaining liberation this lifetime, really resonated with me. And this was many, many decades ago, and I devoted my life to that. And there's kind of a prototype of somebody who identifies themselves as a Khalsa and aspires to live the ideal prototypical life of a Khalsa. And that has always been described in English. Obviously, they use another word, another culture, but it really means warrior saint. Some
So
people say saint warrior, but I usually hear it as warrior saint. And what that prototype is in the end is the kind of person that somebody in this path would aspire to be, and that is both a warrior, somebody who is fearless in every way, who basically lives their life intentionally with the highest character and lives a life of service, and just basically a very noble person. And again, we'll talk about this in future podcasts, but basically the warrior side of it is a person who lives without fear and who lives a virtuous life and a noble life, and that's their intention. That's the warrior side. And then it's not just a strong, fearless person who's got very high character. There's the other side of it, which is the saint. And that is the person who is loving, comes from their heart, is sweet, tries to treat everybody with love and respect. And it represents kind of like the sweetness of this. So somebody who aspires to live in the way that Guru Gobind Singh has directed them to live the ideal human life and to achieve life's purpose. That prototype for a man or for a woman is to live the life of a warrior saint, a strong, fearless, high character person who at the same time is absolutely loving of all humanity, considers everybody their brother and sister. So that's the prototype. So that's always been that's always been central to this whole Khalsa ideal, is this prototype that we strive to live towards, which is been most often described as the warrior saint. And that's the driving force in my own life. And that's why I asked that the podcast that I did with Fanny back 12 years ago would be called Warrior Saint. And so in the end, I was hoping that any conversation she had with me would be an opportunity, directly or indirectly, to kind of represent the kind of person who aspires to be that kind of person. Hopefully that makes sense.
I
Yeah.
think it does
No,
make
and you're learning a little about me too, because we've known each other a long time, but I haven't talked a lot about those things with you. I don't think some of the background in this.
so. I would like to say here, because as you say, I am somewhat familiar with these concepts, but for the sake of drawing some comparisons that might be useful to our audience, perhaps, would you say that there is a parallel between the Sikh warrior saint philosophy and something like, say, the Bushido code from samurai Japan? We're talking about this mix of, as you say, not just preparation for life's hardships, but also there is an implied code of conduct to it as well.
Yes, yes. Absolutely. No, absolutely. And so the Khalsa have often been described as the samurai of India.
Right.
So I think what you're saying is true. But you see these things actually in a lot of things that have popped up around the world. I'm familiar with the whole idea of Excalibur in the Anglo-Saxon
Yeah.
culture, and these attempts at living at a certain ideal have, I think, been universal and expressed in different ways. I think that the way that Guru Gobind Singh did this was especially effective, and it sure had an effect on me. But yeah, that's for people who are new to all of this. Yeah, I think that's a way of you're probably more familiar with the samurai than you are with the Khalsa, but very similar. A basically skilled in martial arts, as the Khalsa is, following a very clear code of conduct, noble conduct that's also Very true. And also at the same time, especially with the Khalsa, coming from the heart and coming from a place of love and kindness. That's a very important piece of it. That's it. So it's not just warrior, it's not just the saint, it's a saint warrior. And so that's the concept. And that's the reason that I initially got involved with this podcast 12 years ago. It kind of lay dormant for about probably 12 or 13 years. And then this year I had the idea, let's revive that podcast because I was listening to it. I'm going, hey, this is pretty darn good. I think now it's even more relevant now than it was 12 or 13 years ago. So now's a good time. So let's rebirth it, right?
There you go. There you go. Yeah, I would say like right now we are living in the era of podcasting, so we're right on time here. And another thing that I would like to ask you related to this, which I think would be very much of interest to your audience, is because of course you speak of the Sikh path and its ideals and its goals, but I think a lot of people would be very interested in hearing how you came upon this path in particular. Like how did you happen to get to a point where you thought, okay, there is this Indian born philosophy that I feel particularly identified with or attracted towards? Like how did that happen?
That's something that's hard to say in 5 minutes. I will say this, though, for purposes of today's introductory broadcast, is that I'm 73 now, and I was first introduced to this when I was 25 and started on my life of commitment to this when I was 27. Okay. So this I was like 50, more or less 50 years ago.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
And so that I will say for purposes of this broadcast is that I wasn't born into this. And in fact, back then, and we could talk more about it in the future, I think I was a hippie back then. And I was living in a very different time in the United States. And a lot of stuff was going on then that caused me to come into contact with this. But at the end of the day, I first came into contact with this, something I had never actually had any idea existed when I was 25. And many of these new ideas completely blew my mind. And it took me many years to really integrate all of this, to really understand it. Many, many years. And going kind of back to the podcast, by the time it's 12 years ago, okay, I'm around this almost 35, 40 years at that point. So I had already had, interjected this into my life. And somebody heard me talk about it and was interested enough that they wanted to host me on a podcast 12 years ago.
Right.
And here we are. But no, I'm not dodging your question. Obviously, that's a dive deep conversation. Uh, but it happened almost 50 years ago that I was introduced to this.
And as you say, it was not an overnight sort of thing. Like it was like an actual process where you sort of we could say you progressively came to understand the thing better with time after having already dived into it. Would that make sense?
Yeah, or thinking I was diving into it. I mean, because, and again, we can even talk about your life in further sessions, but a lot of times we think we know what we're doing, but then we're doing and we realize we really only understand a portion of it. And then we have to digest it. Like even being married or anything, you make a big decision in your life and you are very passionate about that in the moment. But then it's like, oh my God, what did I just do here?
all of the implications come into place. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So then you have to kind of digest what you did, and then you realize that, oh my God, I'm just like an absolute beginner in this, and I don't even know what I'm doing here. But that's, you know, it's part of any big decision in life. So yeah, I made a big decision, and yes, you're right. I think it took, in fact, I'd say it took me decades to sort out that decision. And even at 73 years old, I continue to be surprised on how many dimensions of it exist that I didn't even know existed yesterday. So it's a never-ending learning experience, that's for sure.
This leads me to another point here, which is because, of course, this is just to give us like kind of a practical viewpoint regarding, the Sikh lifestyle and things like that. But what were, for example, some immediate changes in your lifestyle or behavior that you had to implement as a result of going like, okay, I am going to be a Sikh now? Like, what does this imply?
I mean, where do you even start? These things are like so deep. And like, what are the changes in my life? And I mean, whoa, we're going to have podcasts that lasts for an hour. I'll probably talk about just like what one thing, one change. Okay. But I think again, this is our first, a maiden voyage, so to speak. And I think what I do like is you're asking me about why is this entitled, Warrior Saint, and what does Warrior Saint mean? I think that, okay. And also what we're trying to accomplish here, what I'm trying to accomplish here, okay? And how is that tied into the name and the format of what we're doing? Because I think in future podcasts, we're going to explore all these things in extreme depth without necessarily lecturing anybody or telling anybody, trying to persuade anybody about anything. We're just going to open up just a dialogue that naturally we will be talking about all these things because of how they affect our day-to-day life and the day-to-day life of our listeners.
Right, right. I can understand that. Well, that being the case, then I am going to go in a pivot in a slightly different direction here. And I'm going to go back to the warrior saint thing because I think there is a lot of depth to be found there. I'm very intrigued by the term warrior saint because it implies a kind of balance just from here. Why do I say this? Because you have the warrior on one hand. First thing that comes to mind when you hear the word warrior is strength, courage, resilience, like, steel, that sort of thing. But then you have saint, and then you associate that more with things like compassion, spiritual insight, love for the people around you, doing things from the heart, as you say. So there is a kind of like self-balancing act in the idea of the warrior saint. Like you have someone whose strength is tempered by compassion and whose compassion is sustained by strength, essentially. Like, does this make sense what I'm trying to say here?
Wow, I would say that you did a much, much better job than I did explaining this because I was listening to how you described it, and that is absolutely what the inference is. And I think you really captured it extraordinarily well with your words, much better than I did. Although I'd offer one other thing, though, and this has to do with my own kind of evolution and my understanding of it, is that if you had asked me 40 years ago, 30 years ago, maybe even 20 years ago, what this what this meant having these two words in juxtaposition to describe a person's prototypical ambition, I would have actually agreed with all of that. But I think actually what you described from my own experience is more of a reasonable inference that people could take. Okay. And not being untrue either. But I think my view of those two words now is different in that it's not an equilibrium because they're really not two separate things. It's more of an integration. I think it's the same thing, of yin and yang, that kind of thing. Like they're like somehow paradoxical. They're paradoxical opposites.
Right.
Okay. Okay, that somehow dance together uh to create something. But in time I realized that actually they're the same thing. That, as you would say, strength and kindness are not opposites that are imbalanced. It's actually more subtle than that. They're actually the same thing, just expressing themselves in different ways, but they're the same thing. They're blended. And so the idea eventually that I came to learn is that it's not keeping my life in balance. I don't think that's what the gurus meant by, and again, only they know, I'm not claiming to be the guru, but
Right.
I
Right.
don't think that they meant, although it's represented that way, but I think it's much deeper than just merely that this is some kind of equilibrium balance between two opposites that happen within a person, because I've come to see that really what we're being led to is being a very unified person, that we're not two separate parts. We're just one person. We're one being. And it's like water and water. It's an integration. And that in the end, since it's a total merging and union and integration, you really can't separate these things. They're the same thing in the end. And that one of the things we're aspiring for is to see that duality, and you're trying to bring it into harmony, but actually you're hoping in this lifetime to get to the point that there is no duality at all. It's just one thing, that you're a merging of these two things. And so that has been my experience. My understanding about that term warrior saint for that reason has changed.
Very fascinating, because I want to bring up a little bit of Sikh history into this. I'm not going to go into it super in depth, because we could spend like 5 episodes just talking about Sikh history and it wouldn't be enough, probably. But this makes me think of how the lineage of gurus in Sikhism starts with, a man of the caliber of Guru Nanak, who was pointedly not a warrior in his time. He was more so, I would say, I don't want to use the term traditional, but for the sake of practicality, we could say more of a traditional spiritual leader. And then throughout time, the lineage transmutes and evolves into a lineage of like warrior spiritual leaders, without losing or changing any of the focus on compassion and sainthood that already existed. This is kind of what comes to mind. It was integrated into it, as you say. It's not like one thing was changed for the other. It simply began to express itself in a new way. Would that be accurate to what you're saying?
Well, yeah, and again, I like the way that you articulate things, because the word that I heard coming from you was expression,
Right.
and so it's the same consciousness. So this is really what I think we're trying to do in this podcast too. In the end, is that we're trying to bring to people's awareness the existence of a certain type of consciousness. Okay. We're not trying to convince people about anything. We're not trying to convert anybody to anything. It's nothing like that. We're trying to just bring to people's awareness of the existence of a certain prototype of consciousness that has never actually changed, as you said. I mean, even from the founder down, it has expressed itself in different ways as circumstances have dictated. But it's exactly the same worldview. And that worldview gets expressed differently depending on what's going on in the world at any particular time. And so it's a state of mind, it's a state of being, but and we're really hoping, I hope you're on the same page with this, is that we're not actually going to be intentionally having philosophical conversations about the meaning of life. We're probably going to be having conversations about day to day life, and what's going on in the world that we live in on a very pragmatic, day to day, mundane way. How interesting it is dealing with human beings and the challenges that human beings have. And I think somehow tying it into kind of a very simple way of tying all the loose ends together. How it all it doesn't matter what we'll be talking about, it's going to be bringing us back to the same place, which is, why is that true? And is that congruent with why we were put here, or is not congruent? And if it's not congruent, what could I do in my life to kind of get me back on track? So it's basically conversations about all the interesting things and people in life. But in the end, it's about people. It's not about like a theology. It's about, I foresee our conversations are going to be about curiosity about the things and people that inhabit the world, including our own lives, and seeing how that matches up to that prototype without trying to convince people of anything. Just, I think we would be doing the best job in our podcast, instead of telling people what we think and what our opinion is, you know, and trying to convince people that we're right or wrong, is that I hope that our conversations provoke curiosity, and enough curiosity that people aren't going to sleep at night after hearing the conversation. And not that we're like suggesting that anybody's right or anybody's wrong, but kind of having people think about these things and how it affects their life, and maybe open doors about the existence of things that they didn't even know existed. So I think that would be, and like you were saying, like, this is a good example. Like, you're bringing up about the warrior saint, about how this would be equilibrium. And I'm suggesting maybe even more than an equilibrium, that it's more about like seamless integration. Okay. And it's not that anybody's right or wrong. It's just that it's a really interesting thing that could be looked at different angles. And I'm hoping that just us talking about these things would give reason for people to actually think about it in their own life and decide for themselves, rather than be told this, this is how it is, this is how it's not. Because I could do that if I want to. I was trained as a lawyer, right? But I'm not wanting really to persuade as much as I am to introduce people to new things and give them the opportunity to open their own minds and reach their own conclusions with it. Like, for instance, on this thing of integration, I'll give you an example. So we often talk about the heart of a person. That's very common. We talk about a person's heart. But it's really interesting, because when we talk about a person having a lot of courage and a lot of character and a lot of strength, term, at least in English, you hear most often is, hey, they had a big heart. They have a big heart. They've got a huge heart, which means they're very courageous, they're very brave, they're very selfless. They're very, very strong, they got a strong character. Yeah, they got a big heart. But also, people who are very kind and sweet and loving and compassionate, same thing. People say they have a big heart. Okay, but there's no accident because from my experience, to really have a huge heart, you have to have both, not one. It's not enough it's not enough to be loving and compassionate. It's not enough just to be strong and courageous. If you're really talking about what a big heart represents, it's all at the same time, actually. It's like, it's not even serially. It's like at the same moment. How can you be like the most courageous, strong person under any circumstances and still maintain your kindness and sweetness? That's a challenge. That's very hard to do. So I understand people could do one or the other, but Guru Gobind Singh, in talking about the warrior saint, as far as I can understand, is trying to let us develop in this lifetime the capacity to have all those qualities all at the same time, not one or the other, and not even serially at the same moment. Because there's no difference. There's no difference between them, in my experience.
I might be paraphrasing some Greek philosopher whose name I'm not remembering right now, like it doesn't matter, but I remember having read something about how strength without compassion can very easily devolve into cruelty, while compassion that is not tempered by strength can also very easily be weakness. So there is kind
Absolutely.
of sort of thing going on there.
Well, I think that's exactly, again, I think that's exactly the idea.
Yeah.
Is that one quality is no more important than the other. You know, and we'll talk more about these things, but it's like examples of this pragmatically was that even if you find yourself in mortal combat with somebody because the circumstances dictate it, at the same time, you can't forget that that's your brother that you're in mortal combat with, that he's also a human being. Listen, to me, it takes tremendous personal development to master either of these things. But to work on yourself and devote your entire life, to being a warrior saint and develop both of these capacities as strengths at the same time is very rare. There's very few human beings who've actually come close to being able to exemplify that. It's yet at the same time, it's a worthy goal to devote your life to be. According to Guru Gobind Singh, it's maybe the most worthy goal to dedicate your entire life to being that kind of person. And your day-to-day life will give you you don't have to go to a mountain retreat. It's the opposite. We're taught that you actually develop these qualities interacting in the world, in your day-to-day life, in your job, in your personal relationships, that there's all these challenges that will allow us to become courageous and compassionate at the same time if we're willing to take advantage of the short time we have here to do that. And so I'm hoping, I keep getting back to our podcast, I'm hoping that people will be very surprised knowing what we're saying today, that we're not trying to convert anybody into any religion. It's nothing like that. All we're doing is we're trying to basically let people know that in this lifetime, if they choose, it's possible to dedicate your life to that goal. That life itself will give you that opportunity if you choose to take advantage of it. And that I'm hoping we have these incredibly interesting conversations like we are today, and hopefully humorous conversations, and talk about things that people think have nothing to do with personal development. But of course, every conversation has to do with life and people and personal development. So we hope to take people on a trip all over the world, internally and externally, with other interesting people, hopefully, as well. And to understand that in the end, we're all going in the same direction. And that all these things that we're going to be exploring in our conversations are going to help us get there, and hopefully organically, not in a forced way.
Right. Yeah, no. I'm especially excited about the part referring to guests because I am very happy about the idea of bringing in interesting people from all over the world to share here with us, as you say. And like, I also want to elaborate on what you mentioned in regards to our audience that we're going to be talking about all kinds of things here. Someday you might catch us talking about current events and philosophy or history, and some other day we might be talking like recipes for the weekend or something like that.
Sports, politics, anything.
Yeah,
It'll
anything.
just be what's going on in our lives and the world. That's all.
Yeah. And I want everyone to know that this is a very friendly space. Everyone is welcome here to be a fly on the wall and listen. And I think we're gonna have a lot of fun. You know, continuing with the questions a little bit. Actually, there is something else that I wanted to approach regarding this, which is okay. This is gonna be a big question. I want you to avoid it. I want to give me some kind of answer on it. Like, if someone came up to us right now in this moment and told us that they are interested in the warrior saint ideal, right? Where would you say that they would have to get started if they wanted to know anything about this? Like, where, in which direction would you point? I know it's a big question, but there's going to be something in that sense.
Well, it's as big or as small as you want to make the question. Okay, so to me, from my experience, my angle at it is that by hanging out with us, they're already starting. No, and I'm not being presumptuous to say it, but if they're interested in enough to hang in with a conversation with two people who are like seeking to use their life for that purpose in whatever way they're doing it, without knowing it or with knowing it, they've already started, because just hanging with people oriented in that direction will naturally take you where you need to go. That's called in Indian culture, it's called Sangit. It's called spiritual community. It's called Sangit. So if you're just hanging with us, it's going to have some kind of direction and influence, whether you care for it or you don't want any part of it. But you're hanging out with people who probably are very much like yourself. And I wouldn't underestimate that. And that's a good place. So you've actually already started. Okay. And I think that has a huge influence, because now what you're talking about is you're talking about resources.
Right.
Okay. You're talking about resources. Okay. Um, and people and in time, those resources will present themselves, and then you'll have a choice to do that. But everybody is different. For instance, we're both members of a group called the Khalsa Society group, right? And this is also a kind of a place, and it's on WhatsApp. There's actually a WhatsApp group called Khalsa Society, where people from all over the world who have either an investment or in the Khalsa in their own life or are curious about it can actually get inspiration and resources and find a sense of online community with other people. Okay. And those people have resources. If you write to info@khalsasociety.org, and ask to be invited in, you'll be invited in, and you can then now you're meeting more people. So I think that's very important place. And there's many other resources that you can go to. Unlike when I started getting involved with this, there are many online resources. There's websites like seeknet.com. There's, if you want to learn more about Guru Gobind Singh and his writings, I mean, there's a lot on the internet about that. And there's videos on YouTube about that. There are many people speaking about it, actually representing it fine. Some, in my opinion, misrepresenting it for all kinds of, because that's what we're dealing with today. There's all kinds of stuff out there. And so, you're asking me, how do people get started? I think getting started, you're here with us. I told you about the Khalsa Society. That's not a bad resource. The internet is a very good resource that will take you to those places. I had a teacher named Yogi Bhajan who died 20 years ago, had a tremendous influence in my life. And I would not be here in this conversation with you even today looking like I am, had not been for his influence in my life. So, of course, his teachings are very available out there. And so yeah, sure. Yeah, and I think as we go along, we'll be able to give people more and more resources, but hopefully that's not a dodge answer.
A starting point of some kind, because for me, it was funny. When I met you for the first time a few years ago, and I had no idea about Sikhism whatsoever. In fact, I'm going to take this as an opportunity to give a bit of context to how we met, to our listeners here. I was sent a message by an acquaintance of mine because there was going to be a yoga seminar in my city. And I was told that they needed an interpreter, a translator, for an American man who was coming to my city because they had lost the guy who was going to do the gig previously. So they asked me if I could do it. I was like, yeah, of course. I had never done yoga in my life. I had only the vaguest idea about faith and religion from India, from that part of the world. And I was very taken aback when we originally met because, and this might sound funny to you, but it was my first time seeing a guy in full regalia with the turban and the beard, just coming through the door into this coffee shop where we were waiting for you. And I remember that actually, I don't know if I ever told you this, but the first time I saw you, the first thought going through my head was, what did I get myself into? And I remember, and we started chatting, and of course, we got along pretty much immediately. But like all of this world was completely unfamiliar to me, and we spent like what I would say like 5 days, something like that, working together more or less. And then after you left the city, I was left thinking, okay, this man said that he's a Sikh. What is a Sikh? And so I spent the following, I don't know, 3 weeks to a month just stuffing my head full of information about who are the Sikhs, where do they come from, what is their history, what is their cultural heritage, all of these things. And, I tend to, I have this thing where I get into a sort of hyper focus on my topic of interest at the moment. And I was very deeply taken aback by all of the cultural and historical richness of the Sikh tradition. And, that's kind of what drew me in. And I think that if we get any listeners who are history buffs or who are interested in other cultures from around the world, they would probably have a good time going into a similar rabbit hole like that. So I fully recommend it to anyone.
Yeah, and you kind of answered your own question, is that everybody, to me, is going to do this differently.
Yeah,
Like you're going like, what do you recommend?
yeah, yeah,
It's kind of a loaded question because it kind of depends on the person, right? So you're going to go in it the way you did. Somebody else would not do it that way. So I generally, people ask me that question, but I almost prefer getting it on a individual level because it'll be based on my take of that person because we're all kind of a little different in our own ways and we kind of approach these things differently. So it depends on the person and how much, some people need to take it really, really slow. Other people like it really, fast. And some people like it online. Some people like it in a form of a community. I mean, so everybody's a little different. And the thing that I think you've learned personally is that it can all be very overwhelming.
Yes.
And and everybody has kind of a different kind of sensibility in being bombarded with new ideas. And it's easy to kind of like, as you said, going, what am I getting myself into? Or what have I got myself into? That's very normal. Okay. And time will tell whether that was a mistake in strategy or not, the way you did it, the way anybody does it. But it's a really good question, but you could see that there's no like a cookie cutter answer to that question. I was thinking it was very important to acknowledge that if somebody is interested in this conversation and is kind of interested in hanging with us, they're already started, and there should be some self acknowledgement. And it's not like they've started in the path of becoming a Sikh because that's really not the issue. They've kind of started in kind of just deepening their interest in gaining some kind of direction and identity in how they're going to be dealing with the game of life and the existential questions that it raises while they're still here. And where they land up, nobody knows. And as you know, people come and go. So, people even on this path, people come and go, but for now we have people who are sitting at our table listening to our conversation. And I hope you feel the same way that uh kind of sitting in with us can be some kind of stimulus for them to move forward in their own life and how they choose.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
And we're hoping it's entertaining too, because you know me and I know you. And I think one of the challenges we're going to face in this effort that we're doing is having people understand why we're talking about certain things that don't, to them, may seem have nothing to do with what this podcast is about, but it always will because it's always about two things: it's about life and it's about people, right? So every conversation's a relevant conversation, and we're hoping to follow I think it's something I mentioned to you. We don't have plans to do anything. Believe me. To me, my objective is to go where the conversation leads us. That the conversation will have a life of its own. And we trust in the conversation, we trust in the participants, and that it will take us to very interesting places that really talk about the human condition.
A lot to discuss ahead. And I think that people shouldn't underestimate, um, the more quote unquote mundane topics, because I think that generally as human beings, there is a lot of daily occurrences that we tend to take for granted when they are actually quite significant when you look at them a little bit closely, you know? So we're going to be getting into some stuff that might seem mundane at first glance, but there's going to be a whole cornucopia of meaning behind it.
Well, I think, again, I think you mentioned something very important that what's mundane and not mundane is in the eye of the beholder. And that we're hoping by hanging with us, you'll get to realize that every single moment of your life is filled with information if you choose to pay attention to it. Is never an empty moment. Every moment is full of information, lessons, direction, everything. And it's full of pleasure and it's full of pain. It's if you pay attention to it, there isn't going to be 1 second. I'm hoping that's one of the outcomes of our effort is to really show people that you don't have to go anywhere to get wisdom in your life. Wisdom is everywhere around you if you choose to pay attention to it. And we're hoping to show people we're going to be talking about all kinds of things. And people are going, what does that have to do with anything? But I'm hoping that we actually are able to inspire people to understand that everything has to do with everything. There's nothing that doesn't have nothing to do with nothing. That it's a matter of connecting the dots. And we're hoping that our conversations helps people connect their own dots.